And welcome on into another season preview show. I'm your host, Terry, joined by Scott Reichel again on my left, and Ian on my right, making his return here, doing the season preview shows. Ian was on a lot of shows last year, breaking down a lot of the teams. You can find him on Twitter at Bobano. He caps everything. I'm sure you're going to be joining me in capping women's hockey when the league starts, Ian. I'm sure they're in January. I'm super excited for that. But we'll get to that another time. This show here is talking about the Florida Panthers. Very interesting team, and we will jump right into it here with the first segment, additions and subtractions. Uh, Pretty big list here for the Florida Panthers. Obviously, losing Alex Lyon, Patrick Hornquist retired, Radko Gudas, really good defensive defenseman, Anthony Duclair out in a trade, and then the Stahl brothers, Mark and Eric, both on their way out here of Florida. Additions: Oliver Ekman Larson is coming in to Florida. Kevin Stenlin, Mike Riley, Nico Mikola, Anthony Stolars, Dmitry Kulikov. Those are all depth guys. I see. No, I don't really see any big, huge additions here. Evan Rodriguez, I think we could probably all agree is the biggest offensive addition here on this team. Um, so not a whole lot here done the offseason really to improve the Florida Panthers, a team that squeaked into the playoffs by 1 point last year. And we will see how this season goes. Scott, we'll start with you first in this segment, additions, subtractions. What do you think about Florida's offseason?
Well, I wanted to start off with a question. I see the first name you have listed as Ekman Larson. Based on the last couple of years, does that count as an addition? Just asking. No, I'm just joking because I know he hasn't exactly had a great career recently. After he was a bright defenseman in Arizona, it didn't exactly work out recently, but we'll see what happens. But it's really an interesting team to analyze. We're going to get into the actual point total in a bit, but this team was, as you said, the last team to get into the playoffs. They rode the back of Lyon, and they ended up making the Stanley Cup because Bobrovsky ended up going, just having one of the best, I'd say, Stanley Cup runs we've ever seen. I know it didn't exactly work out in the final series, but he kind of carried the team throughout the entire Eastern Conference playoff run. They lost a lot of guys, though. And I guess the question that I have here is Florida was really a tale of two halves. They were really bad in the first half of the season. They were on the verge of blowing up the entire team. Then they caught fire. They kind of realized everything gelled together, and they made it to the Stanley Cup final. So I guess the question is, which half of last year was the reality and which was the fluke? Because it does seem like, once again, it, it was really just a weird year for the Panthers. They lost a lot of guys, but you also tend to see how difficult it is naturally to make it back to the Stanley Cup final. Most teams don't do it. I do wonder, usually, if you see a little bit of a letdown or some regression in store for this team. But when it comes to the addition and subtraction, for the most part, I'm looking more at the subtractions because they lost a lot of guys who gave him a lot of very good minutes last year. And you're looking at, first of all, I'm going to start off with a Lyon, who I thought was a solid goalie last year in the regular season. Bobrovsky was really good in the playoffs, but he was really a non-factor for most of the season where Lyon carried them in the final couple months. Gudas was solid. Duclair was really good in the back half of the year on the playoffs. You lost the Stalls. That's also not going to be a fun time. As for the actual additions here, I mentioned Ekman Larson. We'll see what happens. We know the talent is there, but it hasn't exactly panned out recently. Evan Rodriguez is a fascinating acquisition because he's projected to be the first-line starter on the wing. And I'm not sure many people view Evan Rodriguez as being a first-line guy. I think most people think of him being as a second or third-line guy, but now he's got the first-line spot. Overall, they still have a very good power play. You still have Kachuk, who's going to be potentially a finalist for the MVP. We know how great he was last year. But with the additions and subtractions, I do wonder, with the chemistry they built up in the second half of last year and the amount of changeable parts they have, I question how long it's going to take for the new guys to gel with the guys already on the team.
Very good points. Ian,
Sorry if I rambled
additions,
there a bit.
subtractions.
But
Sorry?
sorry if I rambled on a little bit.
No, that was awesome. Additions, subtractions, Ian, what do you think here for Florida?
I actually like Evan Rodriguez. I mean, I think he's a pretty good player. I mean, he's been as a depth center. I like him. He's given you some offense. You know, if he's in that kind of depth spot, sounds like he may be up the lineup. I don't know if that's the optimal spot for him. I would have him up, probably more on that third line spot, but it was very good for Colorado. I think he's gotten better. So I like that addition. I mean, the guys that they added along the blue line, Ekman Larson, Mike Riley, Nico Mikkola, Dmitry Kulikov. I mean, these are guys going to be battling for roster spots. I think when it's all said and done, the performance of the Florida blue line ain't going to come down to Ekman Larson or Riley or Mikkola or Kulikov. At the end of the day, they're battling it out for maybe one spot, on the starting six, at the beginning of the season. Because when you look at this blue line, you've still got Forsling, Ekblad, Montour at battle on that blue line. And you might even see some of these young prospects even get an opportunity because they like Ludwig, they like Benning, they like Casey Fitzgerald, Matt Kierstead, someone to keep an eye on as well for Florida. So, it's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out. What I don't like about Ekman Larson, Scott alluded to it, the defensive, decline has been evident for Ekman Larson, especially last year. Mike Riley, couldn't beat out Connor Clifton, or Jakob Zaboral or some of these depth blue liners for Boston, and now he's here with Florida, and it's going to be a challenge, I think, for him to break through. I do like Mikkola. I mean, when you look at Riley and you look at Ekman Larson and you look at Kulikov, I think Mikkola is the guy that I could see being a nice fit with this blue line. Comes over from St. Louis, physical presence, not scared to throw his weight around, very solid plus defender in his own zone, probably better in his own end, honestly, than Kulikov, Riley, and certainly Ekman Larson. So I actually think and hope he gets that opportunity the most of all of those guys that they signed as far as on the blue line. Steven Lorenz acquired in a trade. Again, a good depth piece up front is how I view that. But it definitely, when you look at the additions, I think, it's nice that they've accumulated some depth. I'm not so sure in the case of Ekman Larson at this stage of his career, or even Mike Riley or Kulikov didn't have a great season either, split with Anaheim and Pittsburgh. So you talk about definitely a situation where there's going to be some question marks there as far as the blue line depth, yes, but quality depth, I guess, is the big question. And then as far as who they lost, Alex Lyon, let's remember what he did to get Florida into the playoffs last year. It's basically he's out and Anthony Stolarz is in, as the backup goalie now for Florida. So I'd argue actually Lyon, with the way he played last year, I'd consider him, probably a little better than Stolarz. So I actually think it might be a bit of a downgrade there for Florida as far as backup goalie is concerned. Bobrovsky, obviously the number one guy, but Stolarz brought in as the backup. Duclair is one of those guys that you didn't see a thing from him in the regular season. I know in playoffs he got things going a little bit, but he was not really much of a factor in the regular season. So he's been dealt away. I can live with Mark Stahl and Eric Stahl being gone. They're at the the down slope of their career, the waning years, if you will. So I think when you look at this team, no massive impactful additions. I don't know if there's anyone on the blue line that's going to be a game breaker for them in terms of the additions, although I think Mikkola could be the best fit because I think he's the best that they brought in on the blue line as far as defensive ability is concerned. But I do like Evan Rodriguez potential. Hopefully they use him properly. Hopefully they put him in the right spot. I think this chatter or belief that Florida has that he might be a top line player, I mean, they've got to put an end to that, put the kibosh on that. That's a bunch of nonsense. You can't put him on a top line spot. He has a specific role. He's thrived in it. You put him in a center spot, second or third line, more than likely third line, because he's an above average defensive player from that spot. He can be very effective for you and provide you some offense. So like I say, for Florida, that's a so-so, I guess, off season in terms of what they did, in my opinion.
For sure. And some of these defensive guys that they acquired are going to get a chance because it was announced today that Ekblad will not be back until January and Montour won't be back until November. So those are two huge.
We knew they were going to miss training camp already. So that is significant that not only are they going to miss training camp preseason, they're going to miss significant regular season action as well.
Yeah, that's something very much to keep in mind when looking at the Florida Panthers to start the season. Moving on along to upcoming free agents here. A big list. Guys that I would be focusing on if I was Florida. Sam Reinhart, his picture is right there. He's top of the list on the forward list. I would be getting him signed. Anton Lundell, RFA, You shouldn't have any issue signing him. But he would be a priority as well. The defenseman list is long. I'd be re-signing Forsling for sure. Um, Carlson, Kierstead, RFAs, you can probably get them for cheaper deals. Same with Mahura. Ekman Larson, Riley, Kulikov, those three that are in that are joining Florida this year, I could see them being 1 year guys and all moving on in the offseason. Brandon Montour, UFA as well. You want to re-sign him. Of course, he had a monster year, fourth in points for Florida last year. So losing him to start the season is really going to hurt. Goaltenders, Anthony Stolars. I guess the big question will be with Spencer Knight on how he looks if and when he makes his return. And then Stolars, not somebody I'd be relying on. He's more of a third or fourth goalie, I think, at this point in his career. So for me, it's Reinhart, Lundell, and Montour would be the guys I'd be focusing on most. Ian, upcoming free agents. What do you think here should be the Panthers' main focuses here in the offseason?
Oh yeah, Montour obviously incredible season, just an unbelievable year for him, especially on the offensive side of things. We saw how he played not only regular season but in the playoffs as well. So obviously utmost priority, no question about it. Anton Lundell, I thought really bolstered his value, if you will, as far as his next contract as well. I thought Lundell had a very, very solid two-way presence for the Florida Panthers, especially in their run to the Stanley Cup final. Last year, I was very impressed with what I saw from Anton Lundell. It can give you some offense, plus defensive forward, wins faceoffs for you. Very, really liked what I saw from him, especially at postseason time. And then, of course, as you mentioned, Sam Reinhart, who, the playoffs, I think, compared to some other Panthers, maybe didn't stick out as much, but certainly still had the pretty solid regular season overall, and he's fit in nicely here. And, of course, it helps when you've got a lot of good players to play with, specifically a guy like Alexander Barkov. So no question about that. Sam Reinhart will be, I agree with that, one of the priorities in the offseason. Like you said, they've got obviously expiring contracts on the guys a lot of the guys they just brought in with Riley, Kulikov, and Ekman Larson. But don't sleep on Gustav Forsling either. Very, very important potential long-term piece on this Florida Panthers blue line. You talk about, look, when you have the kind of season Florida had, a lot of it is because a lot of players take sometimes incremental steps, but a lot of times big, huge steps forward in terms of their development as an NHL player. Talked about Montour doing that, talked about Lundell doing that. And what about what Gustav Forsling was able to do as well for Florida? I thought his game improved significantly last year as well. So there is some very, very big time business. It's going to need to get done for Bill Zito in the offseason. Following the completion of this year. And like I say, it's going to be interesting to see now. They basically I think what they want to do too is you realize that all these guys UFAs, Montour, they want to see if it's something where he can build on what he did last year, or at least maintain somewhat the same level of play. Same with Forsling, rather than just, okay, Montour had this big year, Forsling had this big year, Lundell was terrific, let's get them all signed now. No, I think there's that thought process in Zito's mind where let's see these guys do it again for the 2023-2024 season. Let's see how they perform and hopefully in their case build off the year they had, rather than just jumping at giving all these guys the money off the improved seasons they had last year. So I think that kind of thinking is playing into it from the management perspective.
For sure. Scott, upcoming free agents here for the Florida Panthers. A big list, but who would you be focusing on re-signing if
I
you
think
were
we're all going to touch
Florida's
upon the
GM?
same players. Montour's the main one for me. We know how good Montour was last year and in the playoffs as well. Forsling I like a lot as a defenseman. I think he's solid. Reinhart I'm fascinated with because he's unrestricted, but you're going through his overall numbers. He had a good goal-scoring season, had 31 goals, 36 assists, good point total. I'm going to point out, I know plus-minus is a flawed stat. Second lowest plus-minus on the team, and he had 8 goals in the playoffs, and his plus-minus was 0. A reminder, they barely lost any playoff games like after the first round series against the Bruins in the Eastern Conference. His plus-minus was just neutral. So I do wonder how valuable Reinhart actually is, because defensively, he really doesn't give you anything. He's kind of just solely a goal scorer, very good on the power play. But I do wonder if Reinhart is more expendable than people think, because once again, everything he gives you on offense he subtracts on defense. And I do wonder as a result if he might be an overpaid commodity in free agency in the next year or two. But Montour, I think you have to bring back, assuming he's healthy and assuming that he doesn't completely fall off a cliff compared to last year. I think he's the main guy. Forsing I'm interested in as well. Reinhart, they're going to try to bring back as they should. But I'm just saying if one bottom feeder team gives a king's ransom for him, they should not match the offer and let him walk. That's kind of how I'm looking at it.
Yeah, it's very possible with the cap is projected to go up approximately 5.5 million. Obviously that can change, but it's very possible some team comes and offers him a contract that's just too big.
It's also why you're seeing such a huge surplus of 1-year deals, in this past offseason. People are just, GMs are saying, hold on now, we're going to see the cap increase significantly next year. Let's not go crazy with term right now when we're going to have that happen next year.
Reinhart does seem like one of those guys, once the owners figure out and the GMs what they want to do with the increased salary cap, Reinhart does seem like one of those guys that's a classic stats guy that gets an overpay, and then he goes to a new place and he immediately falls apart. I'm not going to compare him to Jeff Skinner with Buffalo, but I can understand an argument where people think Reinhart can become a serious offensive focal point on a team. But once again, when he's going to cancel out the offensive stuff with the defensive stuff, that does make me believe that he might be less likely to return than most people think with this roster, in my opinion.
All right. Moving on to the third segment, possible lineup for the Florida Panthers. As Scott alluded to earlier, Rodriguez is slated to be on the top line. Not what I had typed up when I had my lines typed up here. I had to edit them with what is projected here. Tkachuk in silver. Not sure if he's going to be 100% to start the season either. This Florida Panthers team got beat up in their playoff run. So they are going to pay for it here early on in the season. I think Tkachuk probably plays, but I don't think he'll be at 100%. Ekblad and Montour both starting the season on IR for a month at least for Montour, and then until January, as I said, for Ekblad. So the defense, you have Ekman Larson on your second pair with Kulikov. That's spelling trouble here. Forsling, as Ian said, had a great season. He is going to be relied upon huge in this beginning part of the season to basically carry this defense because the defense is pretty rough. Bobrovsky, Spencer Knight is slated to possibly be returning. It's nothing is official yet. Obviously, we'll have to see how preseason goes. But if it's Bobrovsky and Stolarz, you're going to need Bobrovsky to stand on his head every night with this defense. And if he doesn't, the Panthers could have a nightmare start to the season. However, using Boston as an example, of course, completely different team, but a lot of people were projecting Boston with their injuries last year to start the season off pretty rough, and we all know what they did. So you have to keep that in mind. Overall, I like the third line. I don't think Rodriguez should be on the top line. I think that'll eventually get itself sorted out. That second line was really great last year. The fourth line will be physical. So overall, I like the forward group. Goaltending, there's question marks for a lot of teams, but for Florida and that defense is alarm bells are going off in my head looking at that defense. But Scott, we'll go to you second this time. Possible lineup. What do you think here for the Florida Panthers to start the season?
I'm going to bet a lot of overs in the first couple months of the season because they're not going to stop anybody, but they're going to score a bunch of goals. I find the lines interesting with this team because Tkachuk is probably a top 5 forward in the league based on what he did last year, and he's technically a second line guy, which is pretty weird. But based on overall time on the ice, he's going to finish in as a top 2 forward in terms of time playing, along with Barkov. We mentioned the injuries before with Ekblad and Montour, and Tkachuk's also a bit injured to start the year. A reminder that Barkov, who led the actual forwards in minutes played, did miss 14 games last year. So he's also had some injury issues in the past. I have questions on the durability. That's simply put. Now, you're looking at the defensive pairings, and it's a mess. But a reminder, they're missing basically their best 2 defensemen because they're both injured. So it's a bit tricky. Ekblad, if we're going to assume he's going to come back in around January, I mentioned before how Reinhart was the second lowest plus-minus on the team. Ekblad was the biggest minus on the team. He's had a lot of injuries throughout his entire career. I wonder how much he truly has left physically. And if he comes back in January, I'm not assuming he's going to play every game from that point forward. Let's put it that way. Ekblad is a very, very good defenseman when healthy, but he has not been truly healthy in a long time. And I feel like that's a serious point that I got to mention. Montour, I have faith in because I do think that he has not had many injuries in his career, but Ekblad has, and that's why it's a bit scary for me. For the lineups, the defensive core is a problem for the first month or two, couple months until they get the main guys back. Goaltenders, I think Stolar is a pretty big downgrade for Lyon. Lyon was just so good at the end of last year, carried them to a playoff spot. And Stolar's, I believe, had a losing record last year in terms of win-loss record. But you're looking at the actual forwards, and do I like the bottom six? It's fine, I think. I mean, I like the fourth line. Is the third line good? We'll see. But I do think, once again, with all the injuries that are going to be the main focal point with this team to start the year, there's a lot of questions, and the defensive core without Ekblad and Montour for at least a month to start the year, maybe more, is a catastrophe.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the word over, you're going to hear the word over. You're totally right.
It's going to
Florida
be six and
Panthers
a
and
half
overs.
in a lot of these games, and I probably won't care, to be honest.
We'll
But
see sevens, I think. Probably not to start off this season, but I think we'll get sevens pretty quickly here, most likely. Uh, Ian, possible lineup here for the Panthers. What do you think about this lineup?
Yeah, there's definitely what Scott said is true. I mean, they're gonna have a challenge on their hands to keep the puck out of their net, on a consistent basis. Now that we know Aaron Ekblad's missing start of the regular season, Brandon Montour as well, and to think with those two guys missing, you've got Gustav Forsling, and it's really a bunch of question marks. I mean, Ekman Larson was a disaster. A turnstile in his own zone. Anybody could beat him with speed. He turnover machine with the puck. That's not what you want to see. And they might be asking this guy to play second pair minutes. That's how scary this situation is right now for Florida on the blue line coming into this season. I like what I saw from Josh Maher at times last year, but they're going to have to ask for more minutes and more impactful, performance from him. And he's going to face tougher lines on the other side as well, because they're going to ask for more from him. I think Nico Mikkola is going to be counted upon even more now. And like I say, he's the one player I think that's got of those depth defensemen for Florida could really give them a boost defensively at that end of the ice. I don't look at Kulikov as a particularly steady, sound, strong defender. Mike Riley couldn't crack things in Boston. And yeah, there's some guys with upside. Like I said, some of these prospects, including Kierstead, but you're going to throw them into the fire, and they could be good in time, but you're going to expect just, brilliance from them right away. I'm not so sure. So they've just got a boatload of question marks. And you're not only talking about losing two of your best defensemen in Ekblad and Montour, it's the minutes they log. It's who they're up against, on a shift by shift basis. It's, all situations they play in for Paul Maurice. I mean, it's just, that is asking a lot to try to survive, a significant amount of time to begin the season without those two guys. And to make matters worse, as we go to the forward group, there's no telling that Matthew Tkachuk's going to be ready for training camp off the broken sternum that he suffered in the playoffs. It's amazing that he just was able to power through and even play a wonder game with that kind of injury against Vegas. But he's trying to recover from that. Sam Bennett had an injury down the stretch of the Stanley Cup final as well that had him out of the commission. And don't forget about E2 Kulmit Lusterinen for them. He was just terrific, I thought, at both ends of the ice. And he was dealing with a broken tibia as well coming out of that run to the Stanley Cup final. So their status, at least for training camp, is very much up in the air. So you're talking about shorthanded on the blue line, and they could be shorthanded up front too. So it's not only are they going to be able to keep the puck out of the net, they're going to probably give up more shots. Shot suppression is going to be more of a challenge. Sergei Bobrovsky, certainly if he plays at the level he did in the Stanley Cup playoffs, maybe he can stand on his head, steal games for them, but I have doubts about that. I have questions about that. Let's not forget this guy was mediocre at best for much of the regular season before he just all of a sudden flipped the switch and just turned into Dominik Hasek, essentially in the Stanley Cup playoffs last year. I got to see him be able to play at that level right from the start, especially with what's looking like a depleted blue line in front of him to begin the season. So I certainly wouldn't talk anyone out of the thought process of look for some overs with Florida early in the season. Team total overs for the opposing team, probably a good look. And more than anything, this is definitely going to be and then you factor in the grind that it was to get to the Stanley Cup final. You play all the way till June. You got to quickly turn around and get ready for this new season. You could be missing a ton of artillery up front. You are missing maybe your two best defensemen on the blue line to start the year. You talk about one of the teams that's right up there for me is teams I'm looking to bet against early and often in October, and the Florida Panthers are right there.
Yeah, I completely agree. Completely agree. We will look at the future bets for this Florida Panthers team. Last year, 92 points, and their point total is at 99.5 this year. So expecting an increase. Of course, they won the President's Trophy the year before with 122 points. So make the playoffs minus 220 for Florida to make the playoffs. I'd be looking the other way, plus 180, just with how the start of this season should be for the Florida Panthers, how strong of a division they're in. Buffalo's improving, Detroit's improving, Ottawa's improving. Uh, Florida barely made the playoffs last year. Pittsburgh's improving if we're looking at a wild card spot with Carlson. This I just don't understand the odds to get plus 180 for the Panthers to miss the playoffs. I think that's a good bet. Barkov goals, Reinhart goals. I'm not going to touch any goal scoring props for this team going into the season here. Bobrovsky wins. He's going to have to stand on his head here, at least to start the season for sure. He had 24 wins last year. I'm not sure if I want to go near that. If anything, I'd be looking at the under potentially. And then no Selke or Jack Adams bets for me. Who will have more points, Florida or Tampa Bay? I'm a little bit, don't want to say low on this Tampa Bay team coming into the year, but both of these Florida teams, I think, are going to take a step back this year. I'm definitely not taking Florida at minus 125. I'm not going to pull the trigger with Tampa Bay. But if I was going to make a bet, it would be Tampa Bay minus 105. I just really don't like the start of the season for the Panthers. And I think this year just could potentially be a write-off if they start off the season as bad as they potentially could here this year. Ian, future bets for the Panthers, anything you're looking at here? What do you think about the make the playoffs? Minus 220 for the Florida Panthers to make the playoffs. Do you think that's priced correctly? What do you think here?
Yeah, if this team is fully healthy coming into the season, even then I'm not so sure they can duplicate, what they did, particularly at playoff time last year. And now you see that, Ekblad and Montour are gone for an extended part of the season to begin. And now we've got questions about Kachuk and Bennett and Lusterinen being ready for the season up front. And yeah, as of right now, there's no way I can do anything with Florida futures bets other than bet their point total under. And that plus 180, to miss the playoffs is very, very tempting to me. Because let's not forget, they had to just go on this heater of a lifetime down the stretch of the regular season. Alex Lyon comes through as an unexpected savior for them in net when things were looking at their worst for Florida to make the playoffs. And let's not forget, even with that great run down the stretch that Florida had to get into the playoffs, they probably still missed the playoffs if Pittsburgh doesn't shit the bed against the Chicago Blackhawks late in the regular season last year. That horrible loss, which basically took control of their own destiny to make the playoffs right out from under them. So that's how close it was. Like the margins were razor thin for Florida last year just to get into the playoffs. And now you see how shorthanded they could be early on, that you're going to have to rely on maybe an over-the-hill Ekman Larson, and you're going to have to rely on Mike Riley, who's been mediocre at best as a defenseman. You got to rely on Dmitry Kulikov coming off not a great year, but for him, it's not a great situation at all, especially on the back end. And Bobrovsky, unless he plays like he did in the playoffs, we're still talking about a guy that didn't have a great regular season. He's getting another year older. He played a shit ton of intense hockey, a lot of shots, a lot of wear and tear in that playoff run. Is he going to be able to just, be fresh, be ready to go right from the beginning? And he's going to have to play great. He's got to be ready to deliver in between the pipes for the Florida Panthers early this season with the state of this blue line in front of him. And I'm not sure he's going to be able to do that. So definitely from a future standpoint, It would be under 99.5 points. It would be no to make the playoffs, or to miss the playoffs, I should say, at plus 180. And there is one of those player props I am interested in, and it's just the old-fashioned, straight ahead, straightforward thinking of playing for a contract. You're probably going to get him playing extra incentivized, if you will, to put up big numbers this year. And that's Sam Reinhart. I don't mind to look over 30.5 goals for him this year, considering he is entering that final year of his current deal, playing for that contract. When the bag is on the line, sometimes that's what gets players to have that big season. And, we are just asking him to basically match his goal total from last year. And keep in mind, he will be ready to play the beginning of the season when Tkachuk might not, and Bennett might not, and some of these other forwards. So if anything, it's going to lead to even more opportunity and ice time for Sam Reinhart, maybe early in the season especially. So I don't mind looking over 30.5 goals for Sam Reinhart here.
All right. Yeah, you finished with 31 last year. Any thoughts on who will have more points, Florida or Tampa Bay, Ian?
I kind of live with you, Terry, where I'm not really singing the praises of Tampa either this year. But the one thing I like about Tampa, without making this too much of a lightning thing, is that they finally get a full offseason to recharge their batteries after getting knocked out in the first round by Toronto, where they haven't had that luxury before. They've had 3 straight years going to the Stanley Cup final, playing a shit ton of hockey. Now, all of a sudden, you get knocked out in the first round. You got better time to rehab and rehabilitate injuries, make sure everyone's rested finally. They finally have a full offseason of rest, right? And that's something they just have not had in years past. And I don't want to sell, proverbial winning players with winning character like Victor Hedman and Steven Stamkos and Braden Point and Nikita Kucherov and Andrei Vasilevsky, who I know wasn't thrilled with his performance in that first round exit against Toronto. I don't want to sell players of that caliber short, and the fact they've been able to replenish themselves with more rest this offseason than any recent one. I wouldn't, totally write off the Tampa Bay Lightning just yet, that their window is closed. So if I had to lean, I'd lean to Tampa more points.
Awesome. Scott, future bets for the Florida Panthers here. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we're all going to be on the under for the point total and for them to miss the playoffs. I think worst case scenario, if you want to fade Florida early, and then you think with everyone coming back and maybe they can figure it out, you're going to get a very nice yes price midseason, because they're probably going to be really bad for the first couple months. So you might be able to pick up a nice middle where you automatically get some arbitrage opportunities to go for the no now and then the yes midseason. But I think this number is way too high. To answer your question earlier, Terry, about why the number is so high, it's because they made the cup last year. Does it mean anything? No, because they lost a lot of players from last year and they're very injured. But if you want to know why the number's this high, it's because there's a certain reputation now that Florida is a serious contender in the Eastern Conference, and last year was not a fluke. I think it was, because they barely got in. Ian mentioned before that they got lucky to get in because Pittsburgh couldn't beat the Blackhawks. You also had the really interesting war down the stretch with the Islanders, the Panthers, and the Penguins, and how 2 of them got in, but it was mostly Pittsburgh just falling apart at the end of the year. But I do think when you're looking at this Florida team, I got more questions than answers, especially in the first couple months. I'm on the no. I think 180 is a hell of a price. I think that no for the point total is also a great deal, because they were well under this number last year, and they still finish in the 90s. You can still have a respectable year. 99.5 is just way too high for a team with this many problems. So I'm on the no. I'm on the under. I think they'll finish with, to be honest, if they bottomed out, I wouldn't be shocked and they finish in the high 80s. It would not totally shock me based on all the injuries that they're going to have for the first couple months. So I am on the under with you guys for the point total, and I'm on the no for the playoffs. I'm going to be tempted by Barkov under in goals. I alluded to it before, but I'm going to just mention it. I mentioned how Barkov's missed a lot of time in his career. I'm going to ask both of you, how many times in his career, 10 seasons, has Barkov played more than 71 games in a season? He's been around for 10 years.
Wow. 10 years, I would say. How many times has he played more than that?
Over 71.5. How many times has he gone over?
4 or 5?
2.
Wow. Even I was giving him too much credit.
Yeah.
I knew it wasn't more than half of it. Yeah.
And that's why I'm going to mention the goals, because his number is set at 28.5. And I'm going to ask you the same question. Out of 10 years, how many times has he scored more than 28.5 goals?
Less than half.
2.
There
Done
you
it
go.
twice.
Two.
Did it in 21-22, had 39, which was a serious outlier, and he had 35 and 18-19. But the point is, in each of the last 4 years, he's played less than 69 games. So I don't have faith in him to stay healthy. I'll take the under on Barkov goals. I think 28.5 is too high.
Plus, he's more of a playmaker. He's more of an assist guy, I think, anyway. So
Well,
I
Reinhardt's
really
going
like
to take
that.
all the shots on the power play, so it makes sense that he's going to get the assists out of it. But I think the Barkov number is too high because of the durability concerns.
And if you like Florida, by the way, and Scott brought it up, it's an excellent point. Don't bet Florida before the season. Don't do it. Okay. You're going to probably see struggle coming out of the gate for this team just because of all the personnel issues. If you still have a high opinion of this hockey team when they've got everybody available, when they're healthy, and if you buy into them, maybe putting together the kind of second half that they did last season, you should not be betting any Florida futures now. Okay, you wait till December, January, you reevaluate where they are at that point, and then if you're still high on this hockey team, then you bet them. And certainly if you have a negative opinion on Florida, then you absolutely should bet them preseason because that's where we expect them to be their most vulnerable with everything that's going on from a player personnel standpoint.
For sure. And that is it. That is the Florida Panthers season preview show. I'm really glad that the Ekblad news came out. Ekblad and Montour news came out today instead of tomorrow after we filmed the show. So that worked out pretty good. But if you like what you heard in this show, make sure to give me a follow. Give Scott and Ian a follow as well. The links to their Twitters are in the description below. So make sure to go give them a follow. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you, everyone, so much for watching this NHL season preview show. Make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons as we continue on breaking down all 32 NHL teams, which will lead to the regular season when the Getting Wild with Terry and Friends NHL betting show will return. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Of course, make sure to follow everyone in the description below that was on today's show to show them some support. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you on the next show.